Living in a seismic or volcanic zone has a psychological impact. How can it not? The Earth is always changing, whether it happens suddenly or so gradually that it is difficult for our human brains to appreciate. And for a small group of people living in what can be called the most remote island community in the world, the Earth beneath them could tremble, shake, or erupt at any moment. Not far from Inaccessible Island is the much larger volcanic island of Tristan da Cunha. Named by and after the Portuguese explorer who discovered it in the 1500s, it is part of a small archipelago that has the same name. While many have made the long voyage to this island over the intervening decades, the British were the ones to officially lay claim to the land. It started as a proposed solution to their overflowing prisons, although that effort was abandoned. A permanent settlement and population would eventually be established by Marines and whalers. An American man from Massachusetts would profess his ownership of the islands, calling them the Islands of Refreshment. Refreshing as this island may be, Tristan da Cunha is an active strato-volcano which erupted as recently as the 1960s, at which time the islanders were forced to evacuate for a couple years. The remaining lava field is a sort of monument to this time, and a reminder of the mysterious power the land holds. In even more recent history, beginning in the late 2000s, earthquakes have been felt periodically, one of the results being a pumice stranding event on the eastern beaches. You can also see the obvious evidence of past volcanic activity in the craters known as maars, many of which are filled with water. Hovering over to the northwestern part of the island, I'm struck by the odd geometries of what I assume to be the island's potato cultivation plots. The islanders must have to be judicious in their use of the very limited, communally owned, arable land here. I wonder about practical things like rainfall and sunshine, and whether the snowmelt and erosion from Queen Mary's Peak has ever swept away crops. While the island does have native species, many of them are threatened by the introduction of non-native flora and fauna. Notably, a mouse that likely came over on ships decades ago and which has grown rapidly in population. It feeds on the eggs and chicks of bird species, some of which are endemic, threatening their existence. This place is about as remote as it gets, surrounded by volcanic activity, subject to harsh conditions and disease, and yet it seems like such a peaceful place. And maybe that's just the misconception of this armchair traveler. But I'm not alone in it. And I'm struck by how Alice Munro writes about the place in her 2008 short story, Deep Holes. One passage reads, "Sally told her son that, before he was born, she had seen footage on television of the inhabitants of Tristan da Cunha disembarking at Heathrow Airport, having all been evacuated owing to a great volcanic eruption on their island. How strange they had looked, docile and dignified, like creatures from another century. They must have adjusted to England more or less, but when the volcano quieted down a couple of years later, they almost all wanted to go home."